Okay, wow. That was really, really good. Seriously. We're gonna make a video about this, aren't we? I think we are. Okay, here we go. I don't think this is getting anywhere near the amount of attention it deserves.
Beautiful legends and beautiful art and beautiful stories from different parts of Latin America.
But this time it's by Maya.
Eagle shall lead them.
Hey everybody, it's Philippe. So you know, when animated movies come out and they're these big epic adventures inspired by real world cultures and places, I get really excited about them. Which is great because lately there have been quite a few of those. When Raya and the Last Dragon came out, you remember I had to go deep and make a video explaining all of the Southeast Asian cultural references I was picking up on that went throughout the film. A few months ago, I started hearing a lot of buzz. A new series called Maya and the Three. And to put it simply, I think this might be my favorite thing released in all of 2021. It takes risks, it goes places that most animated series probably would hold back from, and it pays such a loving tribute to Mesoamerican cultures. Now, I'm not here necessarily to review the series. Here is my deep dive into the cultural roots of Maya and the Three.
Okay, so
I'm aiming to do this mostly spoiler-free. I mean, if you want to be surprised by every single thing going into it, I probably can't be that spoiler-free, but I'm not going to give away any plot points or anything that I think would ruin your first time watching the series. Okay, so up front, Maya and the Three is a 9-episode limited series available on Netflix, and this is cool. This is a format you don't see too often, and it fit Maya and the Three perfectly. I would not anticipate a season 2 at all. It doesn't really lend itself to one. In fact, I would be nervous about a season 2. The show was created by Jorge Gutierrez, who was raised in Tijuana, and he's quickly becoming one of the most exciting creative figures in the world of animation. His other stuff you might know of are a Nickelodeon series El Tigre and the 2014 film The Book of Life, which is out on Disney Plus, I think. And like I said, one of the things that stands out about Maya and the Three is that the animation style. Ooh, it is absolutely mesmerizing. I love that the series understands its medium. It knows it well enough to break rules and to be playful. You'll see things like them toying with the aspect ratio of what's on screen. It makes the whole thing have kind of a comic book feel, which is pretty fitting. The thing it makes me think of is Into the Spider-Verse, and most people recognize that as an outstanding example of animation. Visually, the world here is very maximalist. At all moments, there's just a lot of stuff on the screen, and I think that works really well for what this is. A lot of the characters, especially the gods and goddesses, have super elaborate designs. Each one has so many flaps and accessories and moving pieces, it's kind of like watching Transformers. The male characters, in particular, they look like they are refrigerators built on top of little legs. I don't mean that to be insulting, I loved it. What it was a reminder of what some of the original depictions of these gods and goddesses looked like in carvings and in real-world drawings. It's also worth knowing up front that this is not necessarily a great series for young children. There's quite a bit of violence, and that seems a bit inescapable given that the plot revolves around a supernatural battle. So you kind of just have to be prepared for it. There's other mature themes in here that I think are actually healthy things to discuss with kids when they are ready for the topic, but you should still have the heads up about it so you're not blindsided by the fact. You do have a plot line that surrounds an extramarital affair. Again, something that happens in the real world. I've heard Jorge Gutierrez talk about how including some of these themes was a tribute to the telenovelas that are very important in Latin American culture. And that makes sense to me. So like I mentioned, there's a plot line about an extramarital affair. Again, things that are worth having conversations about, but you're better off with a heads up, huh? Anyway, let's talk about the worlds where this adventure takes place. Whenever I come across something like Maya and the Three or Raya and the Last Dragon, the big question that typically emerges is, who is this for? Where is it set? These things are celebrated as wins for representation, so the next question is, who is it being represented. When you take a very broad approach to representation, like Raya and the Last Dragon does, and paying homage to all of Southeast Asia, there are benefits to that that shows unity across a wider diaspora, and you can intentionally make that choice for some very positive impact. But there are also trade-offs against doing something like a more specific example of representation, like how Encanto is specifically set in Colombia and pays homage to very specific things like Gabriel Garcia Marquez's writing. You know, you get that extra sense of excitement, that extra spark when you know something so personal is being represented. But one thing I find cool about Maya and the Three is you have both, and you see this throughout the geography of the series in particular. So Maya and the Three starts off in the Kingdom of Teca. There are 3 other surrounding kingdoms as well. And way off you have this divine gate that serves as a portal to the underworld. So the Kingdom of Teca is the central location of everything, and my initial guess would have been that it was based on Mayan culture. That's where the main character lives, and her name is Maya, and that all seems so fitting. But they actually had other things they were going for with Maya's name.
Did you know that Maya is one of the most commonly used names? He wanted her to be a warrior princess to represent all of us.
Another reason I might have suspected the Kingdom of Teca to be meant to represent Mayan civilization was the name of Maya's main animal companion, this black jaguar Chiapa. Chiapas is a state in the south of Mexico with a really strong indigenous identity and some famous Mayan sites. But as it turns out, Kingdom of Teca is inspired by Aztec locations, and if you think about it, Azteca, Teca, compare these things visually, that makes sense. There's another location in the film that is very Mayan. It's Mayan in its appearance, and it's the Jungle Lands. You can see so many visual matches between this place and Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. There are 2 more kingdoms here, and they take us beyond the political boundaries of modern-day Mexico. We've got the Golden Mountains, and to me this is very clearly inspired by Peru, or perhaps more accurately, the Incan Empire. As if the hairstyles of these guys don't make it obvious enough, there's also the fact that this guy's name is Pichu. Then you have Luna Island, and I am so happy that this setting was included and featured as one of the 4 main kingdoms. A lot of times Afro-Latinos are overlooked in things that are meant to represent the broader Latin diaspora, and Luna Island was very clearly inspired by the Caribbean islands. This guy right here, this is one of my favorite characters from the series, and he's from Luna Island. He's the rooster wizard Rico. He's a magician, and I love the vocal effects they use on him when he's performing his incantations, which are in the strangest version of Spanglish I've come across. And while he's doing this, he's using something called peasant magic, which gives me some pretty strong Haitian vibes. Just check it out.
Revenite! Everything from this man! Escúchame! Take your stand!
Now, my biggest tip about Maya and the Three is if you're watching this and you speak Spanish, you should watch it in Spanish. There are a lot of nuances that don't necessarily carry over to the English dub. In particular, various characters are going to have different accents, like a Colombian accent or a Venezuelan Spanish accent, or Mexican dialects like Huasmo, and these just add so many more layers on top of each character. I think a big part of the reason why Maya and the Three appealed to me so much is that beyond all the cultural elements going on here, it was just a very good classic adventure story. If you love things like the hero's journey, the call to adventure, the stakes being raised. I also loved how you see adventure worked out through the character of Maya herself. It's not every day that the character in a series I relate the most to is actually the main character, but that was the case here. I think in a lot of Western media, we tend to favor reluctant heroes, or folks like Frodo or Shrek who get this call to adventure and just think, yeah, no thanks. Maya, on the other hand, simply cannot get enough opportunity to go on adventure.
This is going to be glorious. If I survive.
We meet her hanging out at some underground lucha libre circuit, and in one of the earliest scenes, she expresses disappointment that she's not able to go join her brothers in this big epic battle. I think for a lot of people who find themselves underrepresented in a lot of spaces, you have this recurring experience of feeling so much more capable than what you're often given the opportunity to do. And I think I see Maya embody that in a pretty, fun and rambunctious way really well. Her adventure takes her on this Wizard of Oz-like journey where she's joined by other characters that she meets up with along the way. I kind of mentioned a bunch of them already. Episodes 3, 4, and 5 of the series give each of them a chance to have their own individual spotlight and dive deep into the backstory of each of these characters. And I'm so glad they did this because every one of these characters is working through a pretty intense past trauma. For one of them, there was this childhood full of bullying and rejection. Another was a social outcast due to her albinism, and she had to see the effect that that had on her loved ones and her family. I think of the way so many people in the real world have to find healing and overcome things like generational abuse, family separation, discrimination. These plot lines were some of the ones I found most moving. So there is no way I could properly unpack Maya and the Three's cultural roots without spending a good chunk of time delving into the gods, goddesses, deities, and demons present all throughout the story. I love the way they portray these figures and the way they introduce them into the series with these name cards that almost make them seem like WWE pro wrestlers. As a kid, I loved Hercules, and I in particular loved all the Titans in that movie. Even though most of them had fairly minor parts, I thought it was cool that each one had their own theme. There was the lava guy, and the tornado guy, and the icicle arms dude. And I loved seeing how all the different deities were portrayed in Maya and the Three, and that brought back so much of that fun. While the supernatural characters of Maya and the Three are based on real-world gods, goddesses, and deities for the most part, don't expect total accuracy. This is not an academic paper. There's a lot of creative liberties being taken, and I'm gonna go over those in a second. All right, let's start with the main bad guy of the series, and I'm gonna take a shot here at some of these names. Mictlan Tecuhtli. I think I got that, but they call him Mictlan for short. In Aztec tradition, he's the god of death and the principal god of the underworld. But in Maya and the Three, they've made him to be the god of war instead. His wife is Lady Micte Casihuatl, or Lady Micte for short, and so they've given her the death job as goddess of death, which is accurate to her role in Aztec beliefs. Mictlan culturally has been portrayed a number of different ways in carvings and statues and drawings and fan art, but in Maya and the Three, his depiction is pretty original. Having two skulls fighting for space at the center of his body kind of makes his whole aesthetic revolve around conflict. And like I mentioned, while Maya and the Three takes a lot of creative liberties with the deities, it can be a very good jumping off point for finding something that catches your own curiosity, and that's what I did with a lot of the more minor god and goddess characters. For example, Vukub. He's introduced as the god of jungle creatures, and while his role in the whole series is relatively small, he was one of my favorite characters, probably because I also love jungle animals, and look at him, he's like a golden-beaked toucan and looks really cool. As it turns out, his inspiration isn't so much the god of jungle creatures, but a bird demon named Vukub Kakui, if that's how you say it, who pretends to be the sun and moon and is defeated by the Mayan hero twins. Here's another example. This guy's Chivo. He introduces himself as the god of dark magic. He's like a goat god guy. And he's based on the Mayan legendary beast, White Chivo, a sorcerer who can turn himself into like a goat or a dog or any kind of beings. He's a shapeshifter, and he uses that skill to consume livestock. A couple more examples here. This is Extabe, probably the coolest name in the series, goddess of illusions. But in the real world, Extabe is a Mayan demon femme fatale. She lures men into the forest with her beauty and eats them, I guess. Capracan and Spactli, these two are pretty close to their real world inspirations actually. The god and goddess of earthquakes and alligators. Though in the real world myths, I don't think they were married or that they even interacted a whole lot. So you can see how a lot of these deities are inspired by real world figures, but they're not exact translations. Still, pretty good launch point to learn about some really cool legends and stories. So, you're watching Maya and the Three and you're wondering, what's the main theme anyways? What point are they trying to get across to me? There's a few things you can make the case for, and I think one of the big ones is the question of fate. There's this line in Maya and the Three that gets repeated over and over, and you hear it so much that you figure if there's any point that the show is trying to make, this is it.
If it is to be, it is up to me.
Personally, I like the Spanish version of the phrase even better. Si debe ser, es mi deber. I don't know how I would translate that any better or any differently, but I think just hearing it that way puts a stronger emphasis on taking ownership of fate. So much of the plot of Maya and the Three is driven forward by a prophecy and efforts to interpret and make good on a prophecy, and a lot of stuff happens because of how the prophecy is misinterpreted.
Okay, so wait. So rotate the sun to get them. Wait.
The question of fate versus free will is not a particularly new one. It's a philosophical question that's baffled people for ages, and yet it remains totally, perfectly mysterious. I kind of like that Maya and the Three just takes a yes and approach to the whole thing. Yeah, there's fate, and there's things that are meant to happen. But that alone won't make them happen. It's up to us to put some follow through. I think this is a theme that will seem even more significant if anyone has like a family or religious or cultural upbringing where your future just seemed very inescapable and set in stone. While that was a very big theme of Maya and the Three for me, there was one theme that stood out even more. Death is a huge part of Maya and the Three, and my main take is that that's the theme of the story. Two of the most important characters in the series are represented or linked to an owl and a bat, and in Mexican folklore, both these animals represent night, magic, and death. In many ways, this is a pretty devastating series because so many characters die, including a lot of fan favorites. Know up front that if you get into this, a lot of your favorite characters are gonna die. Think of all the devastating losses you encounter throughout the Harry Potter series, but instead of having to deal with those over the course of 7 books that you read over a decade, they're all concentrated into 9 episodes and you get one right after the other. And yet, this film doesn't feel as weighed down by all that death as it could be. In fact, in the world of Maya and the Three, much like in the Latin world that inspires it, death isn't a taboo topic. It's still something to mourn, but it's also just a part of life.
Push the death angle. Yeah, that's a great selling point.
This perspective is a hallmark of Mexican culture. It was a theme in Gutierrez's Book of Life, and Maya and the Three came out, I think, on the week of Dia de los Muertos, which very vibrantly celebrates the relationship between life and death. This is a way of seeing things that goes way, way back. The Aztecs saw the skull as a symbol of vitality, and while this might feel self-contradictory to people who aren't used to seeing the world this way, it's not to a culture that sees life and death as all part of the same cycle. The skull remains a pretty prominent symbol in Mexican imagery all over, from the sugar skulls of Dia de los Muertos to the street art you'll find all over border towns. In Maya and the Three, there are thousands of skulls. They're hidden in images left and right, and I think nearly every frame has a skull in it somewhere. Even some of the spots on this Jaguar Chiapa are skulls. Speaking of jaguars, there's one song in particular that Maya and the Three calls a lot of attention towards. Bolomchon is a song in Tzotzil, a Mayan language, and when you see how much it's featured in Maya and the Three, you figure it's gotta mean something pretty significant to the theme.
Bolong chon tabinahe, kushkushawakan bolong chon.
I had to track down a translation of what it means going from Tzotzil to Spanish. It kind of comes out to being Jaguar of the skies, Jaguar of the earth. Basically, this song is the dance of the jaguars, and in the series, Maya's brothers were known as the Three Jaguars, and jaguars feature pretty prominently throughout the story. To the Mayans and the Aztecs, the jaguars were seen as being able to move between worlds, the heaven and earth, the land of the living and the dead. Finally, you've got this character, Apuch. She's a fairly creative interpretation of the Mayan god of death. Remember, Mictlan is more of an Aztec deity. Apuch was the god of death, darkness, and destruction. But he's also got a few other business cards. He's, interestingly enough, also the god of childbirth and beginnings. Kind of a reminder that these are part of the same cycle. Alright, that was just a cursory look at some of the cultural roots of Maya and the Three, which I loved a whole lot. If you haven't seen Maya and the Three, I recommend changing that fact stat. If you have seen it, I'm curious if you had a different take on anything you saw, or if there were maybe some big cultural references that I missed. I'm not a cultural scholar, especially on this part of the world, by any stretch, so it's very likely that I overlooked